The night my husband told me he was leaving me for my sister, he stood in the kitchen my father had paid to renovate and said, "Rachel, don't make this about money. Megan and I are in love." My sister was sitting 3 feet away wearing the earrings I had given her for her 30th birthday. Neither of them knew that 6 weeks earlier, my father had quietly transferred the house, the family investment account, and his ownership interest in our marketing company into my name. They thought they were walking away with everything: my husband, my family's trust, my father's business, even the house. I let them believe it. Because by the time Jason finally discovered whose name was actually on the paperwork, my sister had already unpacked her clothes into a bedroom she would never own. And the worst part? The affair wasn't even the first betrayal. It was just the first one they thought I had discovered. Before I tell you how I realized my own sister had been sleeping with my husband, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever learned that the people closest to you were making decisions about your life behind your back, leave a comment. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who sees the most. My name is Rachel Morgan. I was 27 years old, living in Louisville, Kentucky, and until that spring, I believed I had one of those lives that looked ordinary because it was secure. I had a degree in communications and worked in digital marketing for Morgan Creative, a small agency my father had built after spending most of his adult life running local advertising campaigns out of a rented office above a hardware store. My father, Thomas Morgan, was not a flashy man. He drove the same silver Ford for 11 years. He wore inexpensive watches. He could spend 20 minutes comparing the price of coffee at 2 different grocery stores and then write a 6-figure check for something he believed mattered. That was how he had always been: generous with people, and much better at reading character than I was. Jason and I had been married for 4 years. We met when I was 21 at a university fundraiser. He was funny without trying too hard, ambitious without seeming arrogant, and attentive in the kind of way that makes a young woman feel like every sentence she says has somehow become important. My father liked him at first. Megan loved him immediately. Megan was my older sister by 3 years. Growing up, people constantly compared us. Megan was louder, more spontaneous. The person who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave knowing everyone's name. Dad used to joke that Megan entered a room looking for the party while I entered looking for the exits. For most of our lives, that difference worked. The first sign was so small I almost feel embarrassed admitting I noticed it. Jason came home late one Thursday in March and dropped his jacket over the chair beside our bed. When I picked it up the next morning, a folded receipt slipped from the pocket. I remember smiling when I first saw it because I assumed it was a business dinner. I had taken her there for her birthday 2 months earlier. That was the same night he had texted me at 8:15, saying a client meeting was running late. I stood beside our bed holding that receipt while he showered 20 feet away. There had to be another explanation, so I put the receipt back exactly where I found it. Because once people believe you are not watching, they become careless. 3 days later, Megan called me while I was driving home from work. "I need help looking at apartments. My lease is ridiculous, and I'm thinking maybe somewhere closer to you." There was nothing unusual about that sentence, but when I got home and mentioned it to Jason, he answered too quickly. I looked over from the refrigerator. Saturday morning, Megan and I toured 3 apartments near East Market. She rejected the first because the kitchen was too small, the second because the street was noisy, and the third because she said the bedroom felt temporary. While the leasing agent took a phone call, Megan wandered toward the window. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe I shouldn't sign anything yet." That should have meant nothing. The feeling disappeared almost immediately. We stopped for coffee, and when Megan reached across the table for a napkin, her phone lit up. The message preview was large enough. Megan grabbed the phone and turned it face down. Something about apartment deposits. Jason's last name was Morgan now, but everyone in his phone contacts had always known him as Jason. Then Megan looked at me and asked, "You okay?" For the first time in my life, I lied to my sister without feeling guilty. That evening, I didn't confront Jason. He kissed my forehead before bed. And at 11:18 p.m., when he thought I was asleep, he took his phone into the bathroom. 7 minutes later, he came back. I never asked who he had been talking to. Instead, the next morning, I called my father. My father lived about 20 minutes away in the brick house where Megan and I had grown up. My mother had died when I was 19, and Dad had never remarried. He was in the garage when I arrived, organizing tools that had probably been organized 3 times already. "Why do you assume something happened?" "Because you only come here at 9 on a Sunday morning without coffee when something happened." But saying it aloud would make the possibility real. He simply set the wrench in his hand onto the bench. He looked at me for a long time. Then he pulled out the stool beside him. Something in his voice made me obey. He wiped his hands on an old shop towel. "I trust people based on what they do when they think nobody important is watching." I didn't say he did anything. For about 3 months, Jason has been asking questions about Morgan Creative. That surprised me enough that I forgot Megan for a second. Ownership, valuation. What happens when I retire? He works in software sales. Why would he care? Dad opened a cabinet and pulled out a bottle of water, handing it to me. He also asked whether the house you two live in is still technically mine. My hand tightened around the bottle. The house had originally belonged to Dad as an investment property. When Jason and I got married, Dad let us move in and later told us he intended for it to become part of my inheritance. That my affairs were handled. That's all he needed to know. "Did Megan ever ask you anything?" He folded the shop towel carefully. "Whether I still plan to divide everything equally between my daughters. Before the restaurant receipt. That families should spend less time counting what they expect to inherit. Now tell me why you're here." I placed each detail on the table like evidence, Megan refusing to sign a lease. When I finished, I expected anger. Instead, he asked one question. "Do you want to know the truth, or do you want them to tell you the truth? If you confront them now, you'll get a story. If you wait, you might get the truth." That sentence changed something in me. Until that morning, I had been trying to prove myself wrong. Afterward, I started paying attention. And once I did, the little things multiplied. Jason started showering immediately when he came home. Megan stopped calling me in the evenings. A perfume I didn't own appeared faintly on the passenger seat of Jason's car. Twice I noticed mileage that didn't match where he claimed he had been. It happened 11 days after my conversation with Dad. Morgan Creative was preparing a campaign for a local restaurant group, and I stayed late editing a presentation. At 8:37 p.m., one of my coworkers, Jenna, texted me. "Rachel, is Jason at the Omni tonight?" It had been taken from across a hotel lobby. Jason stood near the elevators. His hand rested against the small of her back. Her face was tilted toward his. They were smiling at each other in a way siblings-in-law do not smile. "I'm sorry. I wasn't sure whether to send this." Megan was wearing the cream coat I had helped her choose the previous winter. Jason was wearing the blue shirt I had ironed that morning. That detail hurt more than it should have. "Long night," he said, loosening his tie. I was sitting at the kitchen island drinking tea. He hesitated so slightly that I might have missed it 2 weeks earlier. Then he leaned over and kissed the top of my head, not showing him the photograph. I simply watched him walk upstairs. Then I opened the hidden folder on my phone and added the photo to everything else I had started saving. Nothing that looked important alone. Together, they were beginning to tell a story. And Jason had no idea I was reading it. 2 mornings later, Dad called me at work. "Because I should have done something years ago. I'll explain when you get here." His attorney, Margaret Hale, worked from an office overlooking downtown Louisville. She was in her early 60s, wore dark-framed glasses, and spoke as if every unnecessary word cost money. When I arrived, Dad was already sitting across from her. A thick folder rested between them. Rachel, your father has been restructuring several assets. The ones I should have protected earlier. People who think belonging to this family gives them ownership of what I built. Margaret slid the first document toward me. I recognized the address of our house. Then, an investment account I had heard Dad mention maybe twice in my entire life. What I decided to do before you ever came to me about Jason. It means your father has completed a series of transfers and ownership changes he had already been considering as part of his estate planning. Because Megan asked me what she was getting. And Jason asked me what he could control. You never asked me for anything. Then Margaret turned another page. I barely had time to read the first paragraph before my phone started vibrating on the table. Megan sounded unusually cheerful. My eyes moved slowly toward my father. Yeah, I think we should talk. Then my sister said, It's complicated. I looked down at the documents bearing my name. Dad's attorney quietly closed the folder. Whatever she and my husband were preparing to tell me that night, they believed they were walking into that conversation with leverage. They believed Jason had built a life with me that he could divide. They believed Megan still had a claim to whatever Dad eventually left behind. They believed the house was part of the marriage. They believed Morgan Creative would someday belong to both daughters. And judging by the questions they had already asked my father, I was beginning to suspect they had discussed all of it. I really hope someday you understand that none of this was supposed to hurt you. She had just told me everything without actually admitting anything. When the call ended, Dad looked at me. Margaret pushed the folder toward me. Then before you do, there's one more document you need to see. The sender's name was Jason Morgan. The recipient was someone I didn't recognize, and the subject line contained 4 words that made the hotel photograph suddenly seem like the smaller problem. Morgan Creative Acquisition Options. This, he said, is why I stopped worrying about whether your husband was cheating. And started worrying about what he and your sister were planning to take. I read the subject line twice. Morgan Creative Acquisition Options. Margaret opened the email and turned it toward me. Jason had contacted a regional investment group in Cincinnati. Not as an employee of Morgan Creative, as someone presenting himself as a person with anticipated family access to the company. I read that phrase 3 times. Anticipated family access. He told them he had access to the company? I asked. Not exactly, Margaret said. He was careful. He implied that future control might become available through marriage and family succession. He wanted to know what the company might be worth if the ownership changed. Because somebody was already counting money that didn't belong to them. Jason had asked for estimated valuation ranges. What would happen if a controlling share became available? Whether a private transaction could happen without broad employee knowledge. The language was cautious enough that he had never technically promised anything. The investment group contacted him. Because 20 years ago, I helped one of their founders keep his business alive. Does Megan know about this? Because until that moment, I had assumed the affair was the betrayal, and the money was simply something Jason had started thinking about on his own. This wasn't 2 people falling in love badly. Her question to Dad about inheritance, Jason asking whether the house was still in Dad's name, pieces that had looked unrelated were beginning to lock together. I need to hear what they say when they think I know nothing. At 6:42 that evening, I parked outside one of Megan's favorite restaurants in Nulu. They were seated together in a booth near the back. That tiny choice told me more than either of them understood. Her voice had that soft, careful tone people use around hospital beds. For maybe 10 seconds, we listened to silverware clinking around us and strangers laughing at other tables. Then I said, You wanted to talk. Megan placed one hand over his. I watched her fingers settle over my husband's knuckles. And something strange happened. The image didn't destroy me the way I expected. Or maybe because somewhere between my father's garage and Margaret's office, I had stopped hoping I was wrong. Rachel, I don't know how to say this without hurting you. Then say it without pretending that's still possible. I'm leaving. For her? 4 years of marriage reduced to one syllable. Rachel, does that really matter? Jason rubbed his thumb against the edge of the table. About 8 months. I had celebrated our anniversary 6 months earlier. She hugged me in my kitchen and told me Jason and I were one of the good ones. What do you want me to do, Megan? Throw a glass? We never planned for this to happen. Almost every betrayal begins with that sentence. It just happened, he continued. We tried to ignore it. Instead, I asked, at Bellamy's? Or was that after you stopped trying? Jason looked at me more carefully. The balance at the table shifted. Until that second, they had imagined themselves controlling the revelation. Now they understood they hadn't. I want to handle everything fairly. The house. Megan's eyes moved toward him. We should decide what happens with the house before emotions get worse. You're leaving me for my sister and you're worried about real estate? It's the first specific thing you mentioned. Rachel, we've both contributed to that home. Part of the kitchen appliances. My father had purchased the property years before our marriage. The deed history had never been Jason's concern until recently. Now suddenly the house represented fairness. I think selling it makes sense. We divide whatever equity we're entitled to and move forward. Whatever equity we're entitled to. I wondered who had taught him to phrase it that way. His face softened immediately. I had heard that kind of language before. People use it when they have already made the choice for you. I can stay somewhere else for a while if that makes this easier. You just spent 3 weekends apartment hunting. For 1 second, neither knew what to say. You said you didn't want to sign a lease because things could change. This is exactly what we didn't want. You're leaving your wife for her sister and somehow I'm behaving inappropriately because I asked a follow-up question? A couple at the next table glanced over. Can we please act like adults? That sentence almost broke my composure. People who betray you often become obsessed with how calmly you receive the betrayal. They want dignity from the person they denied it to. I folded my hands on the table. Fine. Adult conversation. What else? At the apartment you haven't rented? Jason's patience was thinning. We can stay at the house temporarily. Just until everything is sorted. You want to leave me for my sister and stay in my house with her? Instead, I asked, and where would I go? The words were so casual that for a second I thought I had misunderstood. I should move into our childhood home. They would stay in the house where I had lived with my husband. The house my father had provided. My sister would sleep under my roof with the man she had taken from my marriage. And somehow this had been packaged in their minds as temporary practicality. Did you two discuss this already? How long have you been planning this conversation? Why does every question have to sound like an accusation? Because every answer sounds rehearsed. She pushed her chair back slightly. This is why Jason was scared to tell you. Jason said quietly, I knew you'd make everything difficult. Because I suddenly remembered the man he had been when we met, or the man I thought he had been. The man who once drove 2 hours because I had called him crying after Mom's birthday the year after she died. The man who held my hand at our wedding and told my father he would protect me. Somewhere along the way, protecting me had become managing me, and now I was difficult because I stood between them and whatever future they had imagined. For the first time that night, I let some of the anger show. You had 8 months to say please. Jason followed me into the parking lot. He stood several feet away, hands in his pockets. Then he said, Don't do anything stupid financially. The sentence erased whatever softness I had almost felt. And when people get angry, they make decisions. Moving money, calling your dad, trying to cut people out. Cut what people out of what? I'm just saying, let's keep this clean. What exactly do you think I control? But as I drove away, that sentence followed me all the way home. What exactly do you think I control? Jason did not come home that night. At 7:12 a.m., I received a text, staying with Megan. I think some space is best. Then forwarded it to Margaret. She replied 6 minutes later. They want the house. Morgan Creative occupied the second floor of a converted brick warehouse near downtown. I had worked there for 5 years, starting as a junior coordinator and slowly taking on bigger clients. Dad never gave me an executive title. He made me earn every promotion. At 27, I managed digital strategy and several major accounts, but most employees still saw Dad as the unquestioned owner. That morning, when I entered his office, Margaret was already there. So was our accountant, Glenn Harris. A laptop was open on the conference table. Glenn rotated the screen toward me. Someone attempted to access internal financial reports last night. Jason had occasionally used my work laptop at home, but he shouldn't have had access to financial records. Two-factor authentication blocked it. Don't do anything stupid, financially. They weren't reacting to something I might do. They were checking what I already knew. Can we prove where the attempt came from? She slid a legal pad across the table. From this point forward, do not confront either of them about finances. Do not mention the transfer documents. Do not tell them what your father changed. Because if they believe nothing has changed, they may keep talking. Let them think the door is open. Dad stood and moved toward the window. He did not turn around immediately. When Megan asked about the inheritance 6 weeks ago, I thought she was being greedy. For the past year, Megan has been receiving money from an account I set up for emergencies. A family reserve. Your mother and I established it years ago. Medical problems, housing emergencies, things like that. $32,000. The last transfer was $12,000. 2 days before Jason contacted that investment group. Megan gets $12,000. 2 days later, Jason asks about selling Morgan Creative. A few weeks later, both start asking about inheritance and property ownership. Then the affair becomes public. I just couldn't see the entire thing yet. Bank transfers after the money left her account become harder to follow without formal access. $5,000 went to a consulting firm. Holloway Strategic Partners. Holloway handles private business sales. What kind of business sales? My sister's money had paid a firm that specialized in discrete company sales. Jason was asking buyers about Morgan Creative. This was no longer coincidence. We still don't know the full purpose of that payment. I think betrayal ages people differently when it comes from their children. Can we talk? Just us? Jason doesn't know I'm messaging you. Megan answered almost immediately. She still called it mine when Jason wasn't there. At 11:58, Megan walked through my front door using the spare key I had given her 3 years earlier. She carried a small overnight bag. She set it beside the staircase. I brought some of Jason's things. She looked at it differently now. Not like my sister visiting my home, like someone imagining it as hers. I watched her run one finger along the counter. You remember when Dad renovated this? You always got the stable things. A sentence that had probably lived inside her for years. You got the good degree, the good job, Dad's respect. It sounds like you're making a list. I just want you to understand that Jason and I didn't do this to destroy you. For a second, she looked genuinely ashamed. With you, I always felt like the messy sister. Jason said he felt invisible too. Jason lives in a house he didn't buy, drives a car partly paid for by my father, and spent 4 years being welcomed into this family. What exactly made him invisible? What did you actually come here to talk about? You both really like that word. Rachel, the house is worth a lot now. And if you fight him over everything, it's just going to cost everyone money. The house, savings, whatever interests you have through Dad. She realized the mistake as soon as she said it. Whatever interests you have through Dad. Dad isn't going to run the company forever. There was no reason for her to know that Jason had been asking about succession. Did Jason ask you how Dad planned to divide Morgan Creative? This is exactly why I didn't want to come. You came because you wanted me to agree to something. You brought Jason's clothes before asking whether he could stay here. For the first time, I saw genuine uncertainty. Then Megan asked very quietly, "Did Dad talk to you?" "Us. The divorce. I don't know." But when she reached the front door, she turned. "Whatever Dad told you, he gets angry and makes impulsive decisions." My father was the least impulsive person I knew. "You think Dad did something?" And for the next 10 seconds, I stood completely still. She suspected Dad had changed something. That afternoon, Margaret called. We identified the remote access attempt. The login came through a device registered to Holloway Strategic Partners, the same consulting firm Megan had paid. How would they have my credentials? Or at least I suddenly remembered something. 3 months earlier, Jason had borrowed my laptop while his was being repaired. My internal Morgan Creative login. I had changed some passwords since then. Then she said, "There's more." I was beginning to hate those words. "The investment group Jason contacted forwarded your father another document this morning. A preliminary acquisition outline. Jason cannot sell Morgan Creative." So what exactly were they offering? They represented that a controlling interest would become available after a family transition. When was this document created? Before Jason told me he was leaving. They had been planning a company transaction before officially ending our marriage. My husband and my sister had not simply fallen in love. They had been representing themselves together in a potential transaction involving my father's company, something neither of them owned. Then I asked the question I had been avoiding. "Dad, what exactly did you put in my name?" When I arrived, the dining room table was covered in documents. Dad sat at the head of the table. The house. My controlling shares in Morgan Creative. A commercial property on Baxter Avenue. I didn't even know you owned that. You weren't supposed to need to. Your mother's trust. Because 6 weeks ago, before you knew about the affair, Megan came to me with papers. She wanted me to revise my estate plan. That it would simplify things. Megan's name appeared repeatedly. If your father had signed it, Megan would have received enhanced control over several assets upon his death. He would have been positioned to assist with management through marriage-related authority. Marriage-related authority to Megan? The affair had already started. Megan had tried to restructure the family estate while sleeping with my husband. My father's voice became quieter. I asked her why Jason's name was in documents involving my estate. She said you knew. I felt something inside me go cold. She said the three of you had discussed a long-term plan. She said Jason might eventually help manage Morgan Creative because you didn't want the pressure. He looked down at the documents. I finished changing everything. I had already planned to give you more responsibility. And because your sister spent years asking what would become hers. It felt like standing in the middle of a house after a storm and realizing the walls survived, but the people inside had changed. We need to talk about the house tonight. Megan is coming with me. What are you going to do? He asked. For the first time since I saw the hotel photograph, I knew exactly what I wanted. They've spent months telling each other what they're going to own. Tonight, I want to hear how much of my life they've already divided between them. Neither of them knew my father was parked 2 streets away, and neither knew I had placed my phone face down on the kitchen counter with the voice recorder already running. He removed his jacket and draped it over the chair like he still lived there. Then he sat across from me and placed a folder on the table. "We've been thinking," he said. "I think we can resolve everything without lawyers turning this into a war." Proposed marital settlement. Then I reached a paragraph about anticipated familial business interests. That part is standard language. The document suggested that any future interest I received in Morgan Creative during divorce proceedings could be subject to negotiation. You're trying to claim something I don't even own. If Dad transfers things while you're divorcing, that affects everyone. Megan believed my father's property belonged to a family pool she had a right to monitor. What exactly do you think Dad is going to transfer? We know your father has been moving assets. What were you planning to sell first? Or, were you going to package everything together? Megan whispered. What did he tell you? What is that supposed to mean? Then, at the man who had spent months planning a future with her using assets neither of them owned, and I realized they still believed the biggest revelation was the affair. You should call whoever prepared this. You're negotiating for property that isn't yours. And before either of them could speak, someone knocked on the front door. Are you expecting someone? Jason asked. Thomas. I think Rachel may have misunderstood. Dad had already been planning to come if the conversation went the way we expected. This is a private discussion between Rachel and me. If it concerns property ownership, I'm afraid it stopped being private the moment you started making representations about assets belonging to my client. We're talking about the divorce. My company is not part of your divorce? I opened it to the paragraph I had already marked with my finger. Anticipated. Familial business interests, he read aloud. Jason said quickly, That's protective language. Not in the way you've used it. You wanted paperwork involved. You brought me paperwork 6 weeks ago. For the first time all night, genuine confusion appeared on his face. This was better than any confrontation I could have planned, because once lies begin collapsing, people stop protecting each other. Megan brought me proposed changes to my estate plan. She snapped, because we had already talked about the company. No, we talked about possibilities. You were the one who wanted structure, and somehow they had still failed to tell each other the truth. Finishing this conversation, Mr. Morgan asked me to clarify several facts because there seems to be significant confusion concerning ownership. No, Margaret said. This is documentation. The property located at your current residence. Thomas Morgan transferred full ownership several weeks ago. The transfer was completed before Rachel became aware of the marital relationship between the two of you. So any suggestion that this was done in retaliation for the affair would be inaccurate. That doesn't mean I have no marital claim. I didn't say that. Questions concerning marital contributions are matters for the appropriate divorce process. But ownership is not what you represented it to be in this document. Thomas transferred his controlling ownership interest to Rachel. Rachel is now the majority owner. Because beneath all the manipulation, all the greed, Megan was still my sister. Still the girl who once climbed into my bed during thunderstorms. Still the person who sat beside me at Mom's funeral holding my hand so tightly my fingers hurt. Then how could you give Rachel everything? I didn't give her everything. The Baxter Avenue commercial property. Because I watched what each of you did when you thought I was becoming old. She brought clients into the company, stayed late, learned the numbers even when she hated the numbers, never once asked me what she was getting. You asked me how the inheritance would be divided. And then you started asking when I planned to retire. You asked what percentage of Morgan Creative would pass to my daughters. You asked whether the house was still in my name. You asked whether Rachel would have authority over the company if something happened to me. 3 questions about my death in 4 months. I never asked about your death. You asked about everything surrounding it. You knew all this when we talked at the restaurant? You let me talk about selling the house? You let me bring this settlement here? Because I wanted to know how much you thought belonged to you. You were sleeping with my daughter while planning to sell my company. I never planned to sell anything. Holloway Strategic Partners? You explored selling something you did not own. We were looking at future options. You told me he was planning to retire within a year. You said Rachel didn't want to run the company. You said eventually we would have enough influence to make a sale realistic. Then don't stand there pretending I dragged you into it. From the money you told me you needed for debt? He had given her money because he thought she was in trouble. Megan whispered, "Dad, I can explain. I'm leaving. There is one matter you should hear before you go." Effective immediately, all access privileges previously extended to you regarding Morgan Creative Systems have been terminated. You attempted to access internal financial records using my credentials. A device connected to Holloway Strategic Partners attempted the login. You told me you had everything. And I'm not stopping you from retrieving personal belongings. You're not moving Megan in. You can't control who comes here. Actually, as titled owner, Rachel has significant control over occupancy arrangements, subject to applicable law and any established residency rights. That told me everything I needed to know about what mattered most to him. Did you know Dad was doing this? Since before the restaurant. You slept with my husband for 8 months. You asked Dad to change his estate plan. You helped Jason prepare a possible sale of his company. And then, you came into my kitchen and told me it would be easier if I moved into Dad's house so you and my husband could stay here. Did you steal Rachel's passwords? You told Holloway you could get financials. You told me you already had access. Are we really doing this now? You signed the acquisition outline. You wanted the money as much as I did. That sentence landed in the middle of the kitchen like broken glass. The money you both expected from selling Morgan Creative. 8 million. Holloway estimated 8 to 10. Get out. Get out. I gave you $12,000 because you told me you were drowning. You used 5,000 of it to put a price on something I spent 23 years building. You lied to me about Rachel. You lied about needing help. And you expected me to sign papers that placed him inside my estate while he was betraying your sister. After a minute, he said, "I thought that would feel better." The difficult part begins now. Jason now knows the assets exist. And he knows he isn't getting them the easy way. I'm expecting him to get legal advice. By 10 the next morning, Jason had hired a divorce attorney. By noon, I had received formal notice that he intended to seek an equitable share of marital property and challenge certain asset transfers if necessary. The house, potential claims that Dad had transferred assets to reduce what Jason might receive. Reality meant attorneys, dates, ownership records, source of funds, and proof. Because after what he said at the house, I started wondering. Estate litigation. He contacted him 4 months ago. How difficult it would be to challenge an inheritance structure after a parent dies. But the phrase "after a parent dies" told me how far ahead he had been thinking. He asked whether a spouse could claim part of inherited business interests during divorce, if the inheritance was expected but not finalized. Megan whispered, "Rachel, I swear I didn't know about these emails. Send everything to Margaret." Then she said, "There's one more thing. Jason wasn't planning to stay with me. I found messages with someone named Vanessa." Megan whispered, "He told her he was leaving both of us once the financial situation was resolved." By evening, Jason's divorce attorney withdrew the broadest language concerning anticipated business interests. 2 days later, the acquisition firm formally confirmed that no transaction involving Morgan Creative could proceed. A week later, Dad terminated every remaining informal financial arrangement with Megan. Vanessa apparently stopped returning his calls after she learned he was married. The divorce took months. Jason received what the law and documented marital contributions entitled him to. When the final paperwork was ready, Jason asked to meet me alone. "At always feeling like your father saw through me. He introduced you to clients. And you responded by researching what you might get when he died. I got obsessed with security. You got obsessed with ownership." Then he asked, "Did you ever love me?" Then Jason said, "Megan hates me." That sounds like something you should discuss with Megan. If your dad hadn't transferred everything, would things have ended differently? You just would have taken longer to understand why. Megan and I didn't speak for almost a year. He simply left the door open without pretending nothing had happened. About how easy it became to listen when Jason started telling her she deserved more. She admitted she had confused being chosen with being valued. Dad remained at Morgan Creative even after transferring control. He joked that giving me the company did not mean he planned to stop telling me what I was doing wrong. It wasn't the house. He gave me ownership, then allowed me to decide what to do with it. 2 years after the divorce, Morgan Creative grew enough that we expanded into another floor. On the morning we signed the new lease, Dad handed me the pen. "You're still technically chairman. You come in 6 days a week." Because I had learned how important it was to know exactly what belonged to me, my boundaries, my future. For years, I thought the worst night of my life was the night my husband told me he was leaving me for my sister. It wasn't. The worst part was realizing how many quiet decisions they had made before that conversation. They had priced my father's company, discussed my future inheritance, planned where I would live, calculated what Jason might receive from a divorce. They thought my silence meant I didn't understand what was happening. They mistook trust for blindness. That was their biggest mistake. Because when Jason finally tried to divide my life, he discovered something he should have learned long before. You cannot negotiate ownership of something that was never yours, and you cannot build a future on people you are secretly betraying and expect the foundation to hold. My father had put everything in my name before they knew I was watching, but looking back, that wasn't what saved me. Evidence helped. Paperwork helped. Timing helped. What saved me was the moment I stopped begging reality to be different. The receipt, the photograph, the emails, the settlement proposal. Each one hurt. Each one also gave me information, and information gave me choices. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this. When people reveal what they believe they are entitled to take from you, listen carefully. Sometimes betrayal doesn't arrive shouting. Sometimes it arrives using words like fairness, family, and what makes sense. Protecting yourself does not always require revenge. Sometimes it requires patience, documentation, and the courage to stop explaining your boundaries to people who understood them perfectly before they crossed them. If you stayed with me until the end, tell me in the comments, would you ever forgive a sister after something like this? Or would that relationship be over forever? And if you believe betrayal should have consequences, but dignity matters more than destruction, subscribe and stay with us for the next story. Because sometimes the strongest comeback isn't taking everything from the people who hurt you. It's making sure they never get to decide what belongs to you again.